Marcus had been drinking since noon, celebrating what he called his freedom trip to London. The 28-year-old construction worker from Chicago had saved for 2 years to afford this vacation, and he was determined to make every moment count. The warm summer afternoon had turned into evening as he stumbled through the crowded streets near Buckingham Palace, his beer-soaked shirt clinging to his chest and his voice growing louder with each step. His friends back home had warned him about British customs and told him to be respectful, especially around the famous landmarks. But Marcus felt invincible after 6 pints of beer and several shots of whiskey. The alcohol had washed away his usual nervousness around authority figures and replaced it with a dangerous confidence that made him feel like he could do anything without consequences. The crowds of tourists were thick around the palace gates, with families taking photos and children pointing excitedly at the reuniformed guards standing perfectly still at their posts. Marcus pushed through the crowd, his heavy boots making loud thuds on the pavement as he weaved between elderly couples and tour groups. Several people stepped aside quickly when they caught the strong smell of alcohol radiating from him. Is it? Marcus slurred to himself, pulling out his phone to record what he thought would be a hilarious video for his social media accounts. Time to have some real fun with these toy soldiers. He had no idea that his next few minutes would change his perspective on respect, tradition, and personal responsibility forever. The royal guards stood motionless in their iconic red tunics. In tall black bearskin hats, their rifles held firmly at their sides. These weren't actors or tourist attractions, but highly trained soldiers from elite British regiments, who took their duty of protecting the royal residence with absolute seriousness. They had dealt with countless tourists over the years, but something about Marcus's aggressive approach and obvious intoxication immediately put them on high alert. As Marcus approached the nearest guard, his phone camera already rolling, he began making loud comments about the uniform and questioning whether the guard was even real. The other tourists started to notice the disturbance, with parents pulling their children closer and several people beginning to record the scene with their own devices. The atmosphere around the palace gates was shifting from peaceful tourism to uncomfortable tension, and Marcus was completely unaware of the storm he was about to unleash upon himself. Marcus stepped closer to the guard, ignoring the clearly marked boundaries that tourists were supposed to respect. The yellow lines on the ground and the rope barriers meant nothing to him in his drunken state. He began waving his hands in front of the guard's face, trying to get a reaction while his phone continued recording what he believed would be comedy gold. "Hey there, statue boy," Marcus shouted, his words echoing off the palace walls. "Ick. Even alive in there? Can you hear me?" He started making exaggerated facial expressions and silly gestures, completely unaware that dozens of other tourists had stopped their own sightseeing to watch his embarrassing display. The guard remained perfectly still, his eyes focused straight ahead. But Marcus could see the slight tightening around the soldier's jaw that indicated growing irritation. Encouraged by what he mistook for weakness, Marcus decided to escalate his behavior. He reached out and actually touched the guard's uniform, brushing his fingers against the red fabric while laughing loudly. "Oh, do you really?" This was the moment everything changed. The touching of a royal guard while on duty was not just disrespectful. It was a serious offense that would trigger immediate consequences. The crowd around them had grown significantly, with tourists from different countries watching in horror. As Marcus continued his reckless behavior, several British visitors were shaking their heads in disgust, while others were pulling out their phones to document what they knew would end very badly for the drunk American. Children were asking their parents what was happening. The general mood had shifted from curiosity to genuine concern about what might happen next. Marcus, still oblivious to the severity of his actions, decided to try touching the guard's famous bearskin hat. As he reached up with his beer-stained hand, the trained soldier finally moved. But instead of the gentle reaction Marcus expected, the response was swift, powerful, and designed to send a message that would echo through the crowd of witnesses. The guard's training kicked in, and Marcus was about to learn that there are consequences for disrespecting centuries-old traditions. The other guards at nearby posts had also noticed the disturbance, and their posture had shifted slightly, indicating they were ready to support their colleague if needed. The situation had escalated beyond a simple tourist mistake and had become a matter of maintaining the dignity and security of one of Britain's most important landmarks. "Get back." The guard's voice exploded through the air like a cannon shot, so loud and commanding that Marcus stumbled backward in complete shock. The soldier had turned his head toward the drunk tourist, his face showing the kind of controlled anger that comes from years of military training. "Move away from the Queen's Guard immediately." The crowd around them fell into stunned silence. Marcus dropped his phone, and it clattered onto the pavement with a cracking sound as the screen shattered. His face went pale as the reality of his situation began to sink in through the alcohol fog in his brain. This wasn't a theme park attraction or a street performer. This was a real soldier who had just delivered a warning that echoed across the entire palace courtyard. But the humiliation was just beginning. Within seconds, 2 additional guards had moved to flank Marcus, their movements precise and intimidating. The tourists who had been watching now formed a large circle around the scene, with many holding up their phones to record what was becoming a viral moment of public shame. Marcus found himself at the center of attention in the worst possible way. "Sir, you have violated the boundaries of Her Majesty's property and shown disrespect to the Crown's representative," one of the guards announced in a voice that carried clearly to everyone within 100 feet. "Your behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated." The formal language and serious tone made Marcus realize that his harmless fun had crossed into territory with real consequences. The crowd began to murmur among themselves, with many expressing their disapproval of Marcus's behavior. He could hear fragments of conversations in different languages. But the tone was universal. People were disgusted by his actions. A group of British teenagers started laughing and pointing at him, while an elderly couple shook their heads in disappointment. The social pressure was mounting from all directions. Marcus tried to speak, to explain that he was just having fun, but his words came out as confused mumbles. The alcohol that had given him false confidence was now making it impossible for him to form a coherent defense. He swayed slightly on his feet, and the contrast between his sloppy appearance and the perfectly composed guards made his humiliation even more complete. The guards continued to maintain their professional demeanor while making it clear that Marcus had made a serious mistake that would have consequences. The situation escalated further when palace security officers arrived on the scene, their radios crackling with urgent communications. Marcus watched in growing panic as uniformed personnel approached from multiple directions, all focused on him. The reality that he might actually face legal consequences was finally breaking through his drunken haze, and fear began to replace his earlier bravado. "Please step this way, sir," one of the security officers said firmly, taking Marcus by the arm. The crowd of tourists parted to create a clear path, and Marcus found himself being escorted away from the guards, while hundreds of people watched and recorded his walk of shame. His legs felt unsteady, partly from the alcohol and partly from the adrenaline of realizing how badly he had messed up as they walked. Marcus could hear the comments from the crowd growing louder and more critical. "What an embarrassment," said an American woman with clear disgust in her voice. "He's making all Americans look bad," added her husband. A group of college students from Germany were openly laughing at his predicament, while a family from Japan watched with expressions of polite shock at his behavior. The security officers led Marcus to a small office area where he was questioned about his actions and asked for identification. His passport revealed his tourist status, which meant he could face deportation along with other penalties. The officers explained in clear terms that touching a royal guard and disrupting the peace at a royal residence were serious offenses that could result in fines, jail time, or being banned from the country. Meanwhile, back at the guard posts, the soldiers had returned to their positions. But the crowd of tourists remained large as people continued to discuss what they had witnessed. Many were sharing the videos they had recorded, and Marcus's humiliation was already beginning to spread across social media platforms. His moment of drunk stupidity was becoming a permanent record that thousands of people would see and judge. The officers continued their questioning. Marcus struggled to explain his actions without sounding even more foolish. Every attempt to minimize what he had done only made him look worse, and he began to understand that his vacation was effectively over. The consequences of his brief moment of disrespectful behavior were going to follow him long after he sobered up, affecting not just his remaining time in London, but potentially his future travel plans and his reputation back home. Hours later, as Marcus sat in a holding cell with a splitting headache and the worst hangover of his life, the full weight of his actions began to settle in. His phone had been returned to him, and he could see the notifications piling up as videos of his public humiliation spread across the internet. Friends and family back home were tagging him in posts, asking if it was really him in the viral videos that were being shared thousands of times. The most popular video, taken by a teenager from Australia, showed the moment when the guard shouted at him and he stumbled backward in shock. The clip had already been viewed over 1 million times, with comments ranging from mockery to genuine anger at his disrespectful behavior. "Drunk American tourist gets destroyed by royal guard" was trending on multiple social media platforms, and Marcus's face was becoming recognizable to people around the world. His employer back in Chicago had somehow found the videos and left several angry voicemails about how his behavior was reflecting poorly on the construction company. His ex-girlfriend had sent him a text saying she was embarrassed to have ever dated him, and his own mother had called to express her disappointment in his actions. The consequences were spreading far beyond the palace walls, affecting every aspect of his life. The legal proceedings were swift but thorough. Marcus was fined heavily for his behavior, and the judge made it clear that tourists who disrespected British institutions would face serious consequences. The courtroom was filled with local reporters who documented every moment of his sentencing, adding another layer of public shame to his already devastating experience. When he was finally released, Marcus discovered that his story had reached international news outlets. American news programs were using his case as an example of inappropriate tourist behavior, while British media portrayed him as the perfect example of why stricter rules were needed for visitors to royal sites. His 15 minutes of fame had come at the worst possible cost. The hotel where he was staying had asked him to leave after other guests complained about his presence, recognizing him from the viral videos. Marcus found himself walking through London streets where people occasionally recognized him and made comments about his behavior. The city that was supposed to be the highlight of his vacation had become a place where he felt constantly judged and unwelcome. The flight home was one of the longest experiences of Marcus's life. Fellow passengers recognized him from the videos, and he could hear whispered conversations and occasional laughter from other travelers who had seen his public humiliation online. The flight attendants treated him professionally but coldly, and he spent most of the journey staring out the window, playing the events that had destroyed his reputation in a matter of minutes. When he arrived back in Chicago, Marcus faced immediate consequences at work. His employer had decided that his behavior reflected poorly on the company's values, and he was terminated from his job of 6 years. The viral nature of his story meant that potential employers could easily find the videos with a simple internet search, making his job prospects extremely difficult for the foreseeable future. The personal relationships in his life were also severely damaged. Many of his friends were embarrassed to be associated with him, and family gatherings became uncomfortable. Affairs where his behavior was either awkwardly ignored or directly criticized. His younger sister told him honestly that she was ashamed to share his last name. His father expressed deep disappointment in the way Marcus had represented their family on an international stage. Marcus eventually found work with a small company whose owner was willing to give him a second chance, but at significantly reduced pay and with the understanding that any similar behavior would result in immediate termination. He was required to attend alcohol counseling sessions and community service, both of which served as constant reminders of the consequences of his actions. The videos of his humiliation continued to circulate online for months, occasionally resurfacing. When news outlets needed examples of tourist misbehavior, or when social media users shared compilation videos of public embarrassments, Marcus learned to live with the knowledge that his worst moment had been permanently captured and would likely follow him for years to come. The experience fundamentally changed Marcus's relationship with alcohol and his understanding of personal responsibility. He realized that his few minutes of drunken disrespect had cost him far more than just money. It had damaged his career, his relationships, and his reputation in ways that would take years to repair. The royal guards he had tried to humiliate had instead taught him a lesson about respect, its consequences, and the permanent nature of public mistakes in the digital age. His story became a cautionary tale that was shared in travel guides and social media posts as an example of how quickly vacation fun can turn into life-changing humiliation.